Welcome to week 62 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We're in a Zoom.
A minute with you is like 5 minutes with anybody else.
Welcome to week 62 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
The world's only three-quarter vaccinated Santa Barbara podcast. This is episode 301, originally aired Monday, September 30th, 1985. Police Commissioner Rivers, who kind of looks a bit different to me than last time, doesn't he?
I don't think we've really seen him enough to know what he looks like. I didn't really.
Oh, well, the captain looked
They're all
different
very
last time.
interchangeable to me.
Oh, that's right. We saw the captain last time, and now it's the police commissioner himself. That's right. He tries to get Cruz to take that short 2-month assignment in Miami. Eden says he should take it. Cruz basically quits his job. Eden says that maybe then Cruz can fly around the world with her on the Capwell dime, and she can dress him up in nice clothes and get somewhat irate at the thought of that. So Eden tells him then to go get his job back.
And it's kind of interesting in a way that Eden, who's sort of set up as the spoiled rich girl, actually has in some ways the more realistic perspective on this, because most people wouldn't just quit their job without any other prospects, especially if it was a job that they'd liked fairly well and had done fairly well at. So it's probably actually not the best way to impress your fiancé, who is very career-driven.
Well, I don't think he said to her that he thinks someone's pulling strings. I think that's part of why he's resisting this. I mean, obviously 2 months is a long time.
Yeah, well, I mean, he obviously suspects that, someone is pulling strings and someone is trying to keep him apart from Eden. But as you said, he didn't actually say that, so it just seems like he's being a bit stubborn for no good reason. And
Eden actually says to him, well, we're not going to have much time anyway together because I'm going to be jetting around the world a lot. So that comes as a surprise to Cruz. Mason and Mary continue their date. Gina has, been spying on them. Mason realizes that Mary is a virgin, which embarrasses her, and she runs off for a while. Gina tells Mary that Mason's always bringing girls to the gazebo. What did he do? Have a violinist for you? Oh no, he didn't know it was her, right? He didn't. She pretended not to know. She just said, "Oh yeah, last month he had a girl who was a violinist," something like that. Anyway.
And in all fairness, Gina is obviously manipulating the situation, but we do know enough of Mason's history to know that this is not necessarily false advertising.
And I can't remember how Mason ended up at a sushi restaurant, having had some sake. I think it was a business meeting. But now Mary has to go pick him up. And she's driving him home, and he has some excuse for her to pull over for a second. She thinks he's going to be sick, and he actually lets the air out of one of her tires so that they'll be stranded at the side of the road together.
I'd find that annoying to be stuck in a car so close to home.
Yeah. Well, people are zipping by.
I don't know if I would find that romantic.
Gina tells Brandon that Santana had a baby once, but gave it away because she didn't love it. This is after a small altercation with Santana over the usual things, and then Brandon walks in, and Gina just decides to lob that grenade.
And I think if I were a little kid hearing that, it would just seem really strange. It just kind of comes out of nowhere and is this thing, and then he goes off to play.
Yeah, and Santana says to Gina that she'll find a way to take Brandon away from her. So I think we're accelerating on Santana being,
so,
we've got to get Santana to overcome the obvious reticence and to really have a reason to try and take Brandon away.
Well, and because right now she's just reduced to kind of skulking around the Capwell house and, having these angry little arguments with Gina. Whereas I think, when we first met Santana, she was she was marching down to Mexico and sort of threatening the doctors, and she befriended Gina to try and get close to Brandon, and then she had this relationship with Cece. She was very proactive, and now she's just kind of sitting there looking mad all the time.
Augusta explains to Amy that she just needed Brick to sign some paperwork. Amy is not buying that at all. And Amy tells Nick that she's sure Augusta is trying to hurt Brick. She tells Nick she's decided not to go back to New Staland. So this is now, I think, set in stone. That may be the last we see of New Staland.
However, the baby's not with her, so...
Oh, didn't she bring the baby back?
I thought the baby was still there. I don't know.
They didn't do that usual thing of Marissa or Jade is taking care of her.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
So we don't know. Maybe the baby will stay on a New Staland. Who knows?
But she needs to convince Brick that she came back because of him and not because of his injury and potential paralysis. Augusta tells Bonk Suisse that Brick has signed the papers. So I guess she did get him to sign them somehow.
Sort of. I mean, I can't imagine it would have been a very convincing signature.
So go ahead and start the deposits. So the frame-up is beginning. Lionel has brought in a suit of armor, Augusta notices, and he plans to show it to Brandon. So it turns out, we realize later, he's got one in Brandon's size too. And as a joke, they've decided to hide in them and pretend and be silent and pretend when Augusta comes in that they're just suits of armor. Now, Augusta almost looks in one. To see what's inside it, but the doorbell rings, and it is Gina. And she says, I think you're in it with Santana. And they have a bit of an argument, which doesn't really accelerate too badly, so Lionel doesn't really have a reason to, step in and stop it. But before anyone can do anything, Gina says, it doesn't matter that I'm not his real mother. And Lionel flaps open his visor to stop them. And then Brandon throws open his visor and says, Mommy! So now Brandon knows that Gina is not his real mother.
Now, oddly, this was not the cliffhanger. The episode. I think the episode ended with Mason and Mary in the car.
Yes, the flat tire was.
So this was one very small moment of great excitement in what was otherwise, frankly, a very dull episode.
I mean, nothing really happened. Everything kind of treaded water a little bit.
I fell asleep
and then suddenly this happened. Right at the end. It's like, bang! One of the big secrets is suddenly revealed.
Yeah.
And actually, the other big secret is kind of half revealed because Brandon knows that Santana gave up a baby. So, will Brandon put two and two together?
He's pretty young, but
yeah, he's
I'm
young.
Sure maybe someone will help him put it together.
I was surprised how young-looking Brandon Call is because, having seen him for years, I just was picturing him older, so he's still very young. And so that's it for the Monday episode of this week. September 30th. So tomorrow is October. We've gotten through September. And we haven't seen any action at USB. So I don't know what courses Ted's taking or anything, or has he missed the whole first month of school looking for Lakin?
And Lakin, we now know, is in Lake Tahoe.
Oh, that's right. Did I skip over that? Yes, yeah. Lionel and Augusta got a postcard from Lakin. She's in Lake Tahoe. She's got a job, and she's learned a lot about life, which really kind of freaks out Augusta, because she wonders what that refers to.
Well, and if we remember, that last season when the kids were all down in Los Angeles having their great adventure, remember how possessive Augusta was of Lakin. So, she's actually let go quite a bit since then, but she definitely has that maternal possessiveness in her. So we'll see how that plays out, I guess, when Lakin gets back.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens tomorrow when we watch episode 302 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
That place we just left is a pearl of the Occident.
Welcome back!
Hello.
We finished episode 302 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Tuesday, October 1st, 1985. Is
It
right?
definitely seemed like a Tuesday episode.
We're into October. No school for Ted yet. The other night I was watching The Blacklist and I saw future Kane Garver in the credits. Scott, I'm not sure how his name is pronounced, Jaeck. As a German, I would want to say Yake, but it could be Jake or Jack. I did not recognize him. I was like, where is Kane? And then at the end I found out he was the sheriff, and he had a big beard, and that's why I didn't recognize him. So, in episode 302, as you will recall, Mason had just let the air out of Mary's tires, and they trek over to a phone booth, and Mary has to walk in her stocking feet because of her high heels, and Mason pretends to call the tow truck, but instead he ends up ordering sushi delivered. So they have their sushi on the hood of the car and stargaze while waiting for the tow truck. And then she reveals that she knew that he let the air out of her tires. And she makes him walk back without his shoes. Did I say Mary kisses him? Did I mention that part? While they're stargazing, she kisses him a few times. Then reveals that she knew that he let the air out of the tires. So he also reveals that he threw the jack handle away. She takes away his shoes. They appear to walk at least to the road, I think. The next thing you know, we see them trudging into the Capwell mansion. And Mary goes to bed, but Mason questions Gina about what exactly did you tell Mary about me? Because Mary was making all sorts of insinuations related to what Gina had told her about Mason doing this sort of thing all the time. She says, oh, how many flat tires have there been on this road?
Well, we know that Gina did tell Mary that Mason had a somewhat questionable reputation when it came to the ladies. However, I think Mary would have found that out eventually anyway, because all we've seen of Mason in the first year or so of this series is him sort of, sleeping out in strange beds and that kind of thing. So I don't think it's really a secret.
No, dating secretaries.
Yeah.
Gina bathes Mason's feet, and we'll find out why in a later segment. Brick watches Chariots of Fire. Amy comes in, and he continually tries to get rid of her. And in the end, somehow, he ends up moving into the Perkins dining room.
And I really liked the way they suggested Chariots of Fire without actually springing for the music. They just had sort of that introductory little bit that sounded a bit like the synthesizer in Chariots of Fire, but it was really just playing one or two notes over and over.
Brick was really feeling sorry for himself. He was, I used to be able to run. I don't know if they actually used some Chariots of Fire music or not, but they definitely used the Beatles something a couple of times.
Yeah.
Which probably is quite lucky that YouTube didn't
Yeah,
flag.
I think so.
Unless YouTube is paying the Beatles empire some money whenever someone includes Beatles music, but presumably they're not charging the person, so maybe we should just put Beatles music on all our episodes.
Yeah.
So the Perkins dining room, I don't think we've seen it before, because we've seen the door to the back left, which goes into the nursery, which used to be the what? What was it before nursery? Or was it the dining room?
I've always thought that was the dining room.
Maybe it was just the angle. It looked like when you looked through the dining room to the living room, it looked like it was further to the front of the house than that back door. So, yeah, maybe it was. But there was a dining room table pushed up into the corner, not, the nursery stuff. So that's what made me think it was a different room. Unless there is a front room. They moved the dining room table in there when they made the nursery for Johnny. And that's just a little room that now holds the Brick and the dining room table. So anyway, he's kind of resigned to being back together with Amy, and ends up referring to Johnny as his son. So I think the New Stalen storyline is over at this point.
I think so. I actually thought that Amy and Brick had a really nice exchange while they were in the dining room, because Brick's very obviously feeling sorry for himself, and he kind of accuses Amy of just sort of taking him on as sort of a pitiable charity kind of case. And she says, well, we could turn that right back on you. And she talks about how when he first met her, she was very poor and she didn't have a job, and she was pregnant, and he really pursued her under those circumstances. And I think that really, they really did come to an understanding at the end of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
It was nice.
Yeah. But the doctor does say it could be a while before Brick recovers. So
yeah,
he'll be doing some physical therapy. So it's a good thing Nick and Amy. It's a good thing Nick and Kelly can go out and do all of the detective work about why Minx is so interested in him.
Yeah, now I was wondering where that landed, because it seemed to me like Nick wasn't actually working for Augusta anymore after their little argument a few episodes back.
But he is still working with Brick.
But he's still working with Brick.
Well, he's doing the same job for Brick, right?
Yeah.
Brandon says, "Who's my real mommy?" As Lionel takes the suit of armor off him. Gina tries to tell him that he misheard what she said, and he said, "You said the same thing about Daddy." So Gina tries to say, "Oh, remember when we were living together and with Stockman and Bel Air, and you didn't have another mommy, did you?" So she tries to get Lionel to talk to him a bit, and he says that Gina is his mommy in every way that counts. And then Gina says, "Do you trust Lionel?" And he says, "I trust Mason. He saved me during the earthquake."
That seems to take everyone by surprise.
Mm-hmm. And so later Gina tries to get Mason to lie to Brandon. So that's why she was washing his feet. She says, "Okay, now I want you to tell Brandon that I'm his real mother." So that's interesting. Will Mason do that? Because Gina says, "I could always force you." I don't think he knows she's got those papers, but that's obviously what she's referring to. So, or maybe he suspects she's hidden them.
And it'll be interesting to see if he does lie, how that down the road affects his relationship with Brandon, if Brandon does find out the actual truth. Or even if he doesn't, if Gina sticks to that story, if that will actually end up harming her relationship with Brandon again down the road.
And if Santana gets wind of it, she might think, well, everyone's against me now.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just kidnap Brandon.
Yeah.
And Augusta will surely help. Although Augusta may not be around because, well, first of all, Julia is shocked to meet Janice and says, "Who hired her?" I think she suspected that Lionel may have had something to do with it, because this is not what she was expecting for Brick's replacement.
No.
Lionel tells Augusta, I think it's about time I go on another trip, which really throws her for a loop. He says, "Yeah, I just gotta," after that scene with Brandon, he felt like he just had to get away from Brandon. And Augusta is really horrified by that, and in the end, she manages to talk him into taking her with him, which is kind of what she had wanted a couple of weeks ago when this whole thing with Brandon first came out.
Yeah, although they have a very tense scene before that where he says, "I'm going to go and talk to Brandon," and goes to the Capwell house. And she says, "Don't leave," and he leaves. And you sort of wonder what's going to happen from that, but it turns out, it actually turns out okay, because he decides to go on a trip and she gets to go with him.
Mm-hmm. So they decide they're going to go to Lake Tahoe first to visit Lakin, and later in the episode they've got piles of boxes, and Julia brings some stuff for Lakin, money and clothes and things. So I think Janice is actually moving stuff out to the car by the end of the episode. So they're going to go to visit Lakin, and then they're going to spin the globe and see where they land. And Janice thinks that's a great idea, and Augusta says, "Oh, how nice, our chauffeur approves of us." And once Augusta and once Janice, Lionel, and Julia are all carrying suitcases up to the car, Augusta takes the opportunity to quickly call Switzerland just to make sure that they got her message about Brick having signed the papers. So that scheme could backfire on her.
I think it will, because most of Augusta's schemes backfire on her, actually. And I think that one definitely could. Because, first of all, Amy walked in on her getting Brick to sign paperwork when he was not really conscious.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if this does blow up into a big scandal that seems to implicate Brick into something, it only really requires Amy to mention that fact.
Mm-hmm.
It could then, of course, turn all the heat onto Augusta pretty quickly. Plus, we don't know really the relationship at all yet between Minx and Brick, and she might be very, very protective of Brick for reasons that we don't quite know. And if all of this comes out and Augusta's implicated, it could have very, I think, serious effects towards Augusta, and maybe even have some effects between her and Lionel as well, depending on how it blows up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if Lionel and Augusta go away for a while, Augusta set it up so that the money gets deposited regularly.
Mm-hmm.
So it could build up a bit of a case against Brick. But yeah, Amy will quite quickly be able to debunk that to the willing listeners like Minx.
There's also a possibility that there's aspects of this we don't know about, that, there might be some kinds of safeguards or whatever for a Swiss bank account. You certainly expect there to be, and there might be some way on top of, Amy's witnessing Brick's drugged out signature that they can tie this in more to Augusta than Brick.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine Minx saying, "Well, whose family has a history of shady land deals?"
Yeah.
And that is it. It was actually another fairly laid-back episode for the most part, with just, I think one little revelation, which I can't remember at this point. But yeah, maybe it's a slow week. It's sort of right in the midpoint between one sweeps and the next, I think.
Doesn't seem to be sweeps. No.
No, so sweeps are August and November, and it's now beginning October, so we will slowly inch towards excitement in November, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it for episode 302. So we'll be back after we've watched episode 303 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We have watched episode 303 of Santa Barbara, and we hope that the people doing construction next door will pause for only a few more seconds. Kelly, this originally aired Wednesday, October 2nd, 1985. Kelly flirts with Nick while they work on their book, and there's quite a lot of cute scenes with them. Mm-hmm. But whenever Nick tries to romance her, she says, we need to focus on this book. You got to get chapter 1 done.
Yeah.
Nick sees that Kelly has written a letter to Joe, and of course Nick fears the worst, and follows her to the cemetery, where he sees Kelly read the letter to Joe, saying goodbye, and I have met someone new. So I think Kelly is all in on Kelly and Nick.
I think so.
I assume Nick didn't overhear the contents of the letter, assumes Kelly is still pining for Joe, and when she gets back, he'll have written a letter saying, "I'm leaving town."
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, that it'll actually be misunderstood somehow by Nick, and there'll be all sorts of drama before they finally realize that they belong together.
But they might manage to resolve it all in one episode.
Yes, that could happen too.
Nick has a new theory that Minx placed the call to Glenn. Glenn listens in while Amy calls Minx to let her know that Brick is home from the hospital. But Glenn isn't quite sure that it was her. Of course, we don't see Minx, but from the Amy's end of the conversation, it sounds like Minx is rushing right over.
Yeah.
So we may see Minx pop up at the Perkins house tomorrow.
Yeah.
She does not show up in this episode.
No.
Brick is sure that Minx wouldn't act against him, but Nick says, well, in addition to this phone call, someone high up pulled some strings with the organ donor program, and there was a kidney ready for Brick, so it may not have been a malevolent act. She may have just been trying to keep Brick away from his father.
Mm-hmm.
So, that is the avenue that they're going to investigate. Later on, alone together, Amy tells Brick that Johnny needs a father, and she needs a husband. What are you going to do about that? So, I think Brick is resigned now to being back with Amy. Not resigned, really, but...
Yeah, I think he's convinced, and he seems to be... He was very surly at the beginning of this episode, especially when Nick brought up the idea that it might be Minx. But I think after Nick explained the reasoning behind it, he softened a lot, and he realized that, this was probably part of the whole story that he really needed Nick to investigate for him.
Kirk tells Eden that he was the result of a teenage fling. That he first met Jack when he was 15 years old, and that Jack immediately told Kirk how he was screwing up his life and set him straight. And Jack paid for him to go to, I think he said, Harvard. And about 5 years ago, Jack asked Kirk to take his last name. But Kirk declined. So that's an interesting thing. He's chosen to stick with Cranston, which presumably is his mother's name. Eden says, he says, well, can you, if you don't, if you haven't managed to check my references yet, and you don't want to hire me based on that, can you at least hire me because of my name? So Eden takes him on for a trial basis. And then when Eden leaves, Kirk says, well, that takes care of round one.
So Kurt has a plan.
Kirk seems very devious. Now, is this plan related to Jack? Because Eden actually talked to Jack today on the phone to check out Kirk's story. But, Jack is still, I guess, in New York. Is that where he is? I don't know where he is currently. I think I read online that Jack was in New York, but that may be in a future episode. Gina is suspicious of the flowers that Mason has picked for Mary. Mason tells Mary he picked flowers for her, and she says she'd rather have her car keys back. And she tells Mason that her car was towed, and Mason agrees that he'll pay for the towing and the damaged tires. Mary, of course, is at work at the Capwell house, where we see Charles Bateman lying in a bed all episode. Mason tells Brandon at the gazebo that Gina is his real mother. Doesn't let on to Gina or Santana that he's already said this to Brandon, because Santana tricks Gina into revealing that Brandon knows she's not his real mother, and then promptly goes to Mason and asks Mason to say to Brandon that she is his real mother, because she knows that Brandon trusts Mason. Now, of course, they don't know that Mason's already just told Brandon Gina's his real mother, and he doesn't let on at all.
No.
Gina tells Mason that the reason she's being so forceful with him is because Cece signed the will, and Gina has it hidden. And Mason goes a bit back and forth on, I'd rather do things for you, because I like you, not because I'm being coerced. But Mason starts looking for the will, and eventually ends up in his dad's room and says he's searched the whole house. I started in my room, thinking Gina might find that ironic, and now he searches Cece's room. But he does not find the will. At one point, to flirt with him, Gina says, "You're getting warmer. You've always been very warm." So Gina tells Mason, okay, stop dawdling, go tell Brandon that I'm his real mother. And so in the study, Mason takes Brandon onto his knee, and Santana and Gina are watching at the door to see what Mason will say. And one of the first things Mason says is, do you know the expression, blood is thicker than water? which Gina thinks is a bad road to go down. She runs off, chisels the will out of the pillar, runs back in, and waves it in front of Mason. So, what do you think Mason is going to say to Brandon? Will he stick with the truth, as he claimed to Gina he would? He said the truth, not hurting Brandon, is more important to me than whether or not I'm disinherited.
Well, first of all, we've never really seen Mason like this before. He's actually not in a suit. For most of this episode, he's wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, which is, I almost didn't recognize him at first. So that was kind of interesting. I guess this is his grubbing around looking for hidden wills outfit.
Well, it was kind of dusty, so I think he may have ended up in the attic at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, at one point Gina says, Did you try digging in that old well out back? Mason said, oh, that's sealed off. I think there was a crack in there that someone could have slipped a will into. So Gina's enjoying having Mason running around looking for the will.
I almost wondered if Mason will still kind of hedge a little bit and say something like, well, blood is thicker than water and Gina is your mother, and maybe not actually say absolutely.
I feel like the point of it was to get Gina to retrieve the will that he
I
couldn't
think
find,
so too.
and now he'll try to get it from her in some way.
Yeah, I think so too, because now he knows it exists, so he knows she's not bluffing.
Mm-hmm.
And she's actually found it for him herself, so he doesn't have to look for it anymore.
And he had said earlier, I really can't know if I can believe you that it's signed. Why don't you show it to me? And she says, you're not going to trick me, Mason.
And he just basically does. As we see in this episode, Gina's actually pretty easy to trick, because Santana tricked her earlier in the episode.
Yeah. Santana realized that Gina was upset about something that had happened at the Lockridge house. And Gina starts the day with, I bet Augusta told you everything right away. And she goes, yep. And then just lets Gina talk. Now the funny thing is, most of this happens at 7 a.m. Mason's in a suit at the beginning of the show, picking flowers. Someone else mentions it's 7 a.m. Everyone is up bright and early, including people visiting other people. Kirk shows up at 7:02, I think. Santana shows up at 7:01.
The other thing I found kind of interesting, and this is ongoing for me when I think about how people approach the Capwell house, is that we have twice in this episode, while Mason's searching around for the will, we have people come in and say, what are you doing? Like we had Santana say that, and we had Mary say that. And neither of them live in the house. Mason lives in the house. He should be able to scrabble around and do whatever he likes. And I'm always struck by that.
Let's wait for that guy to finish song. All right, hopefully we heard everything you said. We will be back after we watch episode 304 of Santa Barbara. See you then. We're going to go to a carnival next, probably.
Demolition Derby.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 304 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Thursday, October 3rd, 1985. So the last episode took place at 7 a.m., which I'm calling sunrise, and this episode seems to take place at sunset. But once again, Kirk shows up at the door. Eden is busy telling Cruz she had the same dream again, and then Kirk shows up at the houseboat. Cruz says, yeah, come in. Jack has been talking to Kirk and tells him that Sophia's trial for involuntary manslaughter starts in 2 weeks. But Jack has told Kirk he doesn't think Sophia can win. Mm-hmm. And Cruz says, that's a minimum of 2 years. Everyone urges Sophia to plead guilty in exchange for a suspended sentence. Yeah. Eden is worried that she won't be able to testify wholeheartedly in Sophia's favor if it comes to that. Kelly says that she could, and they decide, well, let's let Ted decide. Mm-hmm. Sophia, of course, Kelly wants Sophia to be able to tell her story Sophia doesn't want a plea bargain, so they all, finally agree, okay, yeah, we'll testify for you. And then suddenly Sophia changes her mind and says she'll plead guilty after all. So I don't know why she really changed her mind on that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I think maybe it was because, they said, yeah, we'll make it work, but, Cece's not going to be available to back up, his side of the story.
That's right. Cruz said Cece won't be able to testify that he loaded the gun. So.
Yeah, so that was going to be a complication. Eden's kind of doing it under duress. So I think that's probably another factor. And so really the only two people who would be sort of wholeheartedly doing it in Sophia's defense would be Kelly and probably Ted. And I don't think they would necessarily be as effective at this kind of thing as an Eden would be. That's what I thought.
Mm.
Or it would just be too much to just put on them. That was my thinking about why Sophia maybe rejects it.
Mm-hmm. Because at one point, I think earlier, Sophia says, Eden, you don't have to testify for me or something. But
yeah.
I think it's decided that she needs all the character witnesses she can get. So.
Yeah.
So Kirk phones Jack to tell him the news. And they talk about how Jack's been trying to get Cruz sent to Miami. So Kirk is in on that plan. And then he asks about a meeting between Jack and the commissioner to get Cruz's job back. And I guess Cruz and Eden they kind of overhear the tail end, but it comes out that Eden asked Jack to intercede for Cruz, and Cruz is not happy at all about that.
Yeah, and I think this is a kind of interesting situation for Cruz because he's used to being the one who kind of comes in and is the level-headed one who solves people's problems, really. And in this situation, he's actually almost being set up as the problem. And so I don't think that's a situation he likes to be in. And I think he's feeling very much at a disadvantage. Mm. And it's making him a little bit defensive, and he and Eden are kind of clashing a little bit over this.
The role of Santana Andrade is now being played by Gina Gallego. And there was no voiceover announcement. Usually when someone changes from one episode to the next, there's an announcement. But nope. Margaret Michaels was sitting in the study yesterday, and suddenly it's Gina Gallego.
And I didn't actually, because we just get quite a brief glimpse of Santana at the beginning of this episode, I didn't even realize it was a different actress until we saw a full,
close
frontal
up.
view. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
She looks a lot older already in those few years compared to that episode of what was it show I showed you a clip from that she was in? Benson, was it, or something?
It was something from the 70s. I can't remember.
Yeah,
what it was.
She looked just like a kid in the earlier one. Oh, Sanford, that's what it was. So it's about 5 years earlier. So she definitely doesn't look like a teen. So yeah, that's apparently that was the original choice for Santana by the Dobsons, but they were kind of overruled when Ava Lazar was cast by, I guess, the network or other people. And I guess they've just been waiting for Gina Gallego to become available and for them to have enough control to put her in. And they probably just told Margaret Michaels to come back tomorrow. I don't know. Look into that a little bit.
Yeah, already I would say she does bring a different quality. She seems to have a little bit more warmth, I would say, than the last Santana, who I think I always found a little bit more, I hate to say shrill, but was always a little more amped up, and I would say this character she's emotional. At one point she's tearing up, but you get a sort of warmer, I would say, more maternal quality perhaps from her. So I would say it's a definite. For me, it is a definite change in tone in the character, just the little bit we saw for today.
And I think the first Hispanic actress to play Santana. So Sophia joins Santana and Gina at the door to the study. Mason chases them all out so he can speak to Brandon privately. In the hallway, Sophia is told what's going on, and Brandon comes out and hugs Gina. So Santana is disgusted and runs off. Sophia goes after her to say it's probably for the best. She doesn't think Brandon's life should be shaken up by this.
Yeah.
Gina suggests to Mason they celebrate in her room, where she burns the will and has sex with Mason. And then, just for fun, she reveals that she just burned a copy of the will. And Mason says, "Maybe you're right about this. You keep saying we belong together. When you pull something like this, I almost have to agree. How can I resist someone so much like me?"
Yeah, you can really just imagine Mason doing that. And I think as we're watching, I don't think anyone watching this was really surprised that Gina was burning a copy of the will. And that's why this whole scene was done in sort of this dim candlelight, so Mason couldn't tell.
Well, I thought she still has the other documents to hold over him, the removing him as head of Capwell documents, which I don't know whether Cece signed those or not, but she hid them for a reason. So
Yeah. But I think it does kind of point to an interesting thing we've talked about before, how Mason and Gina in some ways are quite a bit alike. And so that's why the triangle with Mary is quite interesting, because Mary is very different from either one of them.
I think Mason definitely got felt like he wasn't going anywhere with Mary after his failed evening with her, so he probably figured, he's not going to hurt anything with Mary if he sleeps with Gina. But watch Mary change her mind completely, and suddenly Mason's got to hide his relationship with Gina again. Callie returns from the cemetery, and Nick is very businesslike with her. Of course, she's just said goodbye to Joe, so she wants to get romantic with Nick, but he's working on the book, and then he says, we should have had a formal agreement on who gets how much from this book, because, I need money, and you obviously don't care. So Callie immediately knows something's happened, but she doesn't know what. And eventually he gets out of her that he says that she's still living in a dream world with Joe, and that she saw him leave the love letter for Joe at the cemetery. So she doesn't actually get angry with him. She just says, "Oh, you're mistaken. Why don't you go read the letter?" and chases him out. So Nick goes to the cemetery and reads Callie's goodbye letter to Joe, which I guess specifically names, the fact that she's romantically interested in Nick now.
One thing I've noticed with the writing, I guess, in the last little while is, how some of our characters, I noticed it with Amy a couple episodes ago, and I've been noticing it more and more with Kelly, is that these former damsel in distresses, I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but these, women who sort of seemed at the whims of whatever villains were on set that week, are actually becoming much more articulate and much more assertive. We saw that with Amy and Brick, as I said, a couple episodes ago, where he was being all sulky and she basically threw it back at him. And we're seeing this, I think, in Kelly's approach to Nick in this episode, how, as you say, she doesn't get weepy, she doesn't throw a tantrum, she's just very firm with him, and basically tells him to look at the evidence himself.
So I guess after big apology next episode, there'll be a couple.
Yeah, I think that was, I assume, resolved quite quickly.
They can be happy for all of October until the November sweeps come, and then presumably something will happen.
Yeah, something always happens in November sweeps.
Yeah.
I imagine it might involve Dylan.
Oh, yes, that's right, because we haven't heard from him for a few days, but he's on the run from something, so they don't seem too worried about that cut-off call from over a week ago, I think.
No, everyone seems to have forgotten about that. Janice has moved in with the Lockridges. Nick's, working on his book and his romance with Kelly.
Well, that is all that happened. Even though a lot of things happened, they This has been a fairly slow-moving week, just
Yeah.
on the face of it, even though now that we summarize it, 3 or 4 twists have happened in the various storylines. So this was probably the most exciting of the episodes of the week because of the Brandon thing and the Gina and Mason thing.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, in some ways, Mary and Mason are very appealing because they are very different. It's an interesting combination, but I have to say I don't find their repartee nearly as interesting as Gina and Mason's.
We had the cast credits this episode over the closing theme, showing the study. The hallway in front of the study, which, by the way, is where Gina had temporarily hidden the will. Or maybe had the fake will in there, right? Because that's the one she pulled out. So,
I think she had the copies photocopied, hadn't she?
yeah.
Yeah.
So she pulled those out of that drawer that she and Santana and Sophia had been standing in front of that whole time. But I guess, I don't know when she did the copying. But maybe that's what. Maybe when she grabbed the will out of the desk, she went and copied them. So she's hidden the real one somewhere else. Yeah. Hopefully it's as good of a hiding place. So the credits were pretty much the same, except for Santana is Gina Gallego instead of Margaret Michaels. And all the rest of the cast are still there. Now it's been about a little over 3 months since June 30th, which is, I assume, the ends of the 3-month contract should have come around, but we've still got 2 people on the list who are no longer on the show. In the recurring or day player or whatever it's called section, last time we had Glenn Wallace and Brandon Call. This time we just have Brandon Call as Brandon Capwell. And that's it. Anything else for this episode? Or?
I don't think so.
We will see what happens tomorrow, Friday, October 4th. See if we get any cliffhangers. Probably get some nice Nick and Kelly scenes. And see if the Lockridges made it to Lake Tahoe.
And where is Tad?
Yes. I mean, if he'd just been hanging around the Lockridge house as much this week as he had in the previous weeks, he would have known it was in Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, and he's been referenced a lot. I mean, he was referenced in Eden and Kelly's conversation with Sophia, and they sort of were talking about, we'll have to talk to Tad. But no one made any attempts to get Tad or to call Tad. So I'm almost wondering if perhaps he's in Lake Tahoe trying to talk Laken back home. Or maybe he actually decided to attend university somehow. I don't think we've heard anything about that.
No,
university
it's already
lately,
October. So you guessed correctly that Santana was going to be the recast for this week. And we have a new cast member joining next week. So we will see who that is and who they will be having storylines with. And we'll be back tomorrow for the Friday, October 4th episode, number 305 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've finished episode 305 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Friday, October 4th, 1985. Nick reads Kelly's goodbye letter to Joe, and she's waiting for him in bed when he gets home. It's the middle of the workday, so when Richard Jenkins, their publisher, knocks on the door, they have to scramble to get dressed and answer. And he's not impressed by what's going on, especially since they've missed the deadline. And he says, the book is off. I expected this from Nick, but not from you, Miss Capwell. But they force him to read the first chapter of the book, and it's so brilliant that he says, just have it to me whenever it's ready.
So, a happy day for Nick and Kelly.
Yes, double happy. Brick tries to break up with Amy and starts looking for a new place to live. Amy says he can leave once he's able to walk out on his own. She goes to do an errand, and a tarantula starts climbing up to Johnny When Brick notices it, he tries to wheel towards him, but the wheel gets stuck in the porch, which is where the entire day took place. And so he has to stagger to his feet and runs over, swipes away the tarantula, but ends up falling down the porch stairs. So I wonder if Brick will be paralyzed, after all.
Or if perhaps this movement was the thing that jogged the problem out of the way.
Yeah, maybe.
And it could be the end of his paralysis.
Cured by Monday.
Yeah.
Eden dreams at Cece's bedside and runs into Kirk's arms when he enters Cece's room just as she's traumatized by her most recent dream.
Mm-hmm.
Gina overhears Eden agonizing to Cruz over the pressure to pull the plug on Cece. And then Gina gets the nurse to explain how the backup battery works on Cece's equipment.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Gina's plotting.
Well, I don't think having Cece dead is necessarily going to benefit Gina, is it?
I don't know. The will is hidden.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, if she burns the real will, she would inherit some portion of Capwell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that could benefit her.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that would be sort of the most obvious. The other thing I thought of was that if Eden makes her, her own deliberations public to enough people, that if something happened to CC, the blame might fall on Eden, and that could maybe cause problems for her. And then Gina and Mason would be in a better place to depose her.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I thought of is that if Eden did pull the plug on Cece, so that somehow Kirk might be the only one who knows she did it.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to prevent him from being able to testify against her, he suggests they get married.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That would put a crimp in Cruz and Eden's wedding plans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mason is working on Sophia's case, surprisingly. I guess without Cece yelling around the atrium to stop him. Mason has quietly slipped in there. She thanks him for his diligent work. He says that doesn't mean he's forgotten or forgiven her lies. Mm-hmm. She says, well, I haven't forgotten or forgiven what you did to Cece with Gina. The judge doesn't want to hear from anyone but Mason or Tony. So Eden and Sophia wait out in the hall. And at one point, Sophia asks if Eden will ever forgive her, and she says she's not sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a definite no. After Mason has delivered his defense of Sophia's actions and said, that she suffered enough, the judge thinks that his defense was quite useless and it didn't give him any reason to reduce her sentence or even accept the reduced plea.
Mm-hmm.
So when Cruz hears this, he begs the judge to let him hear his side of it. I guess as the arresting officer, the judge agrees. And after hearing from Cruz, he says, okay, I want to speak with Mrs. Capwell alone, or Mrs. Arbonte.
Mm-hmm.
And, he starts off negatively attacking Sophia. But then when Sophia says, well, if I hadn't lost my memory after I shot Channing, I would have turned myself in right away. And the rest of the conversation seems to steer the judge's mind in Sophia's favor. And not only does he go with the recommendation, he just gives her 10 hours a week of community service for a couple of years, which sounds pretty, like a pretty good result.
Yeah. So she actually comes out of it in pretty good shape, and I guess that's kind of the wrap-up of this trial.
Well, that explains why this was another thing that I didn't quite remember how it turned out.
Yeah.
Because just like another recent thing, it's wrapped up in a very short time within one episode. So after 18 months of build-up, this is the end of the Channing Capwell murder story.
Yeah.
So, but it may help springboard something else because a reporter calls Gina to get her response to the good news. Mm-hmm. And Gina slams down the phone and says, Cece, did you hear that? Sophia got away with murder. And then she starts looking at Cece's machinery.
Yes.
Maybe she thinks she can get away with murder too.
Maybe. maybe, or, as I say, pin the action on someone else, or maybe both.
We will see. It sounds like maybe whatever happens will happen soon. Gina's on the warpath. And that is it for the entire week 62 of Santa Barbara. Next week is a 4-day week, no doubt due to something stupid. So we've only got 4 episodes to do next week. And any thoughts to summarize the week?
I think one thing we saw in this episode is, as you said, Eden spends the night basically at Cece's bedside, sort of trying to figure out what to do, and Kurt comes in and she ends up in his arms, and really this is another example of Cruz being left further and further out of her orbit because she leaves his bed, he's looking around for her, he calls her and she refuses to come home. And then when he makes his way over to the Capwell house, of course, she's already had her comfort from Kirk. So, he's kind of extraneous again, and that's not where Cruz is used to being. He's used to being in the center of things. And yeah, I think this whole week has been probably very destabilizing for Cruz.
One thing I thought of is that there was a good idea on the part of the writers, to introduce the dream, because a lot of Eden's anguish is fairly internalized, and if we get to be within Eden's dream, we get to experience some of that. I mean, yes, she had her conversation with Cruz, but yeah, this actually, because the storyline is mostly about her anguish at having to make that decision. This dream, which has already been shown 3 or 4 times, I guess is important. Yeah.
This is really the first week, I think, where we've not seen Cruz in complete control of a situation.
Cruise control.
Yeah, exactly. He hasn't been. I mean, he tried to quit. Eden went behind his back to try and get his job back. When, he protested. When he protested getting sent to Miami, it didn't go over the way he thought it would with Eden. When he protested her trying to get his job back, it didn't go over the way I think he would have liked it to have gone with Eden. And now we see again that, as I say, he's not really even in the loop right now with Eden's situation with Cece.
I feel like maybe this, the next step is for Eden and Kirk to have a heart-to-heart about her decision. Maybe she'll find that he's on her side, whereas Cruz obviously wasn't. So
yeah, exactly.
That would be another thing to bring them closer together.
Yeah, we've talked about that, and I think they are setting something up like that. And I think Kirk, we know he's thinking very strategically about his relationship with Eden and all the things he's doing. So I think he's going to be using every opportunity to sideline Cruz and do whatever it is he's planning to do.
And there's several references to Jack in this story. Kirk says that Jack found out from the commissioner that if Cruz wants his job back, he can have it. And Cruz says, well, he knows where I live. I'm not going begging. So
which I'm
Jack's
sure
still in the forefront.
Yes, and I was thinking, that whole attitude maybe in another episode or context would come across as strong, but for Eden, who's already expressed several times in many ways how much she would like him to have a job so that she could continue to do hers, I suspect that's just going to be more irritating and alienating.
And she's probably pretty exhausted from her long nights too, so she won't be thinking too straight perhaps. All right, that is it for week 62. We'll be back in 2 weeks as we do the Monday, October 7th episode number 306. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Cece, did you hear that? Sophia got away with murder.